I think back to when our son Will was going through his challenges, and our biggest enemy was ignorance. And I think if we as parents and as society can understand in a holistic way the risk factors that lead to mental health conditions like depression and support young people where the parent identifies in an appropriate way the most likely risk factors for their child, whether it's, let's say, food and nutrition, exercise, sleep, perhaps substance use, chronic stress, and then can support the child through the difficulties they're facing.
Welcome to the MindTech podcast, where we dive deep into the unsolved problems in mental health with the founders, investors, and experts building technology to solve them. Today, I am delighted to introduce Peter Templeton, one of the founders of the William Templeton Foundation for Young People's Mental Health, YPMH, which is a charitable foundation working to improve the lives of young people by facilitating innovation to resolve mental health conditions. For the past 15 years, Peter has also been applying research from Cambridge University's Institute for Manufacturing to solve real-world problems across the world. So, Peter, it's an honor to be speaking with you today, and I wish you a very warm welcome to the MindTech podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Great. So before we dive into all the impact you are making today, let's start by understanding the why behind YPMH and what inspired you to build this organization and make an impact in the mental health of young people.
About 6 years ago, the younger son of my wife and I, Will, who had been suffering from depression for about 2 years, took his own life. And like many parents who have gone through this situation, we wanted to do something to make a difference and really try to reduce the likelihood that others would go through this very difficult situation. And so we began to think about, well, what could we potentially do? Coincidentally, Professor Ed Bullmore, who was at the time head of psychiatry at Cambridge, published a book called The Inflamed Mind, which showed a relationship between chronic inflammation and depression. And I read that avidly and thought, yes, that a lot of those, the things that Ed described, resonated with Will's situation. Will's situation didn't particularly resonate with the other published information at the time. And so I thought, that's really interesting, inspiring, and can we build on that? And I began to read the research literature across social, biological, and psychological research and began to see some common themes. And because of the nature of research and research funding, it was evident that there was some very good work that had been done in specific areas across those three disciplines, but it really hadn't been joined up to any extent. And so I thought, can I apply my chemical engineering background, my background in innovation management and university industry knowledge transfer to actually come up with an approach which is different and can potentially join these things together. And so that was really the background for what we then established as the William Templeton Foundation for Young People's Mental Health.
First of all, I am deeply sorry for your loss. Of course, that is a harrowing experience that no one should have to go through. But I must say, the way you and your wife are honoring Will's memory in a way that reflects the nature of who he was as a person. From what I understand and what I read online, he was so caring and brought warmth into every room that he stepped into. And to really, remember him in a way that reflects the care that he showed to others is hugely inspiring and deeply meaningful. So, really appreciate you sharing all that, and commend you for turning that into a force for good.
Thank you.
It seems like a real unmet need that you've identified in addressing the mental health of young people is the need to connect the latest developments in our understanding of mental health problems from experts all around the world, and making sure that understanding is applied in practice and policy, essentially accelerating mental health innovation. One example of the kind of work you've done to achieve this is the booklet that you recently published based on 5 years of research on depression, exploring the true causes and explaining how it's really not all in the mind, but more within the ecosystem that we all live in. And for me, two of the most impactful statistics from your findings is that the existing treatments for depression in under 18s are effective in only 60% of cases. So for 40% of all people under the age of 18, treatment is ineffective. And even after any of those 60% of cases which are successful, between 50 and 75% experience a relapse, which shows outcomes that really are not at the standard that they need to be at. And it seems like, we have a long way to go. A lot of work needs to be done. So just to kick off the conversation about the work that needs to be done, why do you think young people are suffering so much from mental health problems, and why do you think current solutions aren't working?
Um, just to take a step back for a moment, I suppose the approach that I took was to basically apply engineering root cause analysis to start with the biological conditions that are most closely associated with the depression. So that's changes to brain structure and volume in parts of the brain associated with emotional processing, particularly the hippocampus, and also changes to brain chemistry or metabolites from a balance of neuroprotective and neurotoxic metabolites to a greater proportion of the neurotoxic. And then began to work backwards through things like the immune system, the hormone systems, gut microbiome and genes, and how they're turned on and off, back into the individual vulnerability factors. So things like lifestyle factors, so food, nutrition, exercise, sleep, substance use, and also underlying individual conditions. So things like chronic stress, underlying physical conditions, other mental health conditions, and so on. And then how those interplay with psychological characteristics, and also how they're influenced by social and societal factors. So what we did was develop a large-scale model which represents the system of systems that I've just outlined. And using that model, what we identified was that there are a number of factors which have developed really over the last 15 to 20 years, which seem to be having a significant bearing on young people's mental health, particularly with respect to depression. So the things I'm thinking of are firstly around food and nutrition. The amount of highly processed or ultra processed food that young people consume has increased over that period. And research published, I think, in 2022 suggests that children in school typically get 65% of their calorie intake from ultra processed food. And UPF has a number of characteristics which contribute to the development of the biological conditions which can then lead to depression. A second factor is around the impact of digital devices. And there are many impacts, but one particular one is the effect on movement and exercise. So again, over that 15 to it's really the 15-year period since about 2007 with the introduction of smartphones, and these devices have become quite addictive. We've seen a reduction in young people's movement and exercise that's really quite significant. And exercise, it's now been shown, contributes to the proper functioning of many of the biological systems, whether it's gene expression, gut microbiome, immune system function, indeed even brain function, that in turn contribute to increased risk of depression. And a third factor is chronic stress. And with the 24-hour day on digital environment, the pressure around academic achievement, particularly in schools or other institutions where there is a very high and constant pressure to perform rather than peaks around exams. That can lead to chronic stress. Also, there are a number of social and societal factors which lead to increased chronic stress, which in turn has an impact on the stress response system, the raised levels of cortisol, which then has effects on both inflammation and on the birth of new neurons, affecting the brain volume and so on. So 3 quite significant factors: food, exercise, and chronic stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the root cause analysis that you took there has identified those things, and the reason the current solutions aren't working is because they don't get to these root causes at the moment. What they're doing is
Indeed, and I would say a lot of the focus is really still on treatment, and the health system doesn't have a particularly strong arsenal of innovations to really do more than treat the condition of depression once it's developed, with the constraints that you mentioned earlier. And I think perhaps what we need to do is really identify effective ways to prevent, detect early, and then respond effectively where mental distress is identified in young people.
absolutely, yeah. The knock-on effects of good prevention are immeasurable. They are, really worthwhile pursuing, and yet there's so little investment in that area. So it's great to have this kind of research push forward that agenda and this approach of this ecosystem around young people, and really engaging every group of that ecosystem that shapes the lives of young people is a it's a mammoth of a task, yet it's extremely worthwhile because, as you know very well, and as you've just explained, mental health problems aren't just caused by chemical imbalances or isolated incidents. It's our mental health is a combination and a consequence of the conditions that make us up: our physiology, our psychological characteristics, our social connections, and our lifestyle choices. And you described it as taking on a system of systems, which is, of course, the level that it needs to be addressed at. But in your experience from taking this system of systems approach, what have the challenges been, and what progress have you been able to make in bringing all these different groups together?
Um, I think there are multiple layers of challenges in translating this very positive research into innovations, which are then validated and applied at scale. And the examples of the challenges are, firstly, there is a myriad of potential interventions. I mean, when we did the first work to generate evidence-based ideas for innovations based on the system of systems model, we generated about 200 ideas for innovations. And clearly we can't take 200 ideas forward, and they need to be prioritized. And it's very tempting to take forward the things which are of greatest interest to a small group of people. But I think what we need to do is be more robust and rigorous, using techniques that enable effective prioritization. So looking at, for example, the impact, opportunity, and also the feasibility of those different options, and whether they address a real unmet need or whether they actually address something which is already covered. So using innovation management methods such as that, I think is key. Now, one of the challenges is those opportunity feasibility characteristics vary according to whether one's trying to implement an innovation in the health system or within a school or within a prison or an employment organization. And so we need to have some flexibility, but nonetheless use a robust underpinning methodology that brings together the stakeholders to make those evaluations. And so that's what we did from I think 2021 to till 2023. And we basically then identified about 45 unmet needs and 55 projects to address them across the care stages. And by care stages, we mean different aspects of prevention, so policy level prevention, through primary prevention to individual prevention, and then early detection, diagnosis of conditions, diagnosis of underlying causes, and then personalized management and treatment. So we have, for each of those stages, sets of unmet needs and innovation projects. The subsequent challenge is how to get those innovations developed, validated, and so on. And so one of the challenges is encouraging the funders of research and innovation to look at holistically at that whole translation cycle. And one of the things we're trying to do is work with the major funders to look at the full cycle rather than focusing primarily on the basic and applied research. The third area, third challenge is then how do you translate something that's been validated into, for example, the health and social care system, into organizations engaging with young people and other groups of actors. So I suppose our work has broken down into three key areas. One, information and education that is configured in such a way that is accessible to, say, parents, young adults, and indeed leaders of organizations that engage with young people. So these could be non-medical leaders in schools, in universities, in prisons, in employers. And by informing and equipping people to understand where the risk factors lie in society, within organizations like schools, and what they can do to address those risk factors, we hope that we'll be able to empower them to make a difference. So the first thing we've done for that group has been to produce the booklet "Depression It's Really Not All in the Mind," which was published last month in March, and so that summarizes really the key, the case for action, the key risk factors, and what people and organizations can do. And what we want to do going forward is to make that information accessible to different age groups, for example. So we've said parents and young adults, at this point, so 18 to 25-year-olds, and we want to get that information into a form which is accessible and useful for adolescents, for children, and indeed younger children. And so that's a priority. The second theme is projects to develop innovations. So one example is a project where we are working with some researchers here at Cambridge on a very interesting software tool that they've developed to detect mental distress early in its development. And this is applied at a school level, and it's been validated for specific age groups. And then the idea is to identify those who are showing signs of mental distress, and then to offer targeted support to those children.
Yeah, I hear a lot of ways that you empower different groups, whether that be with understanding or the resources to innovate. But within your own organization, do you build innovations yourself, or are you more the super connector and the facilitator of collaboration?
I love the term superconnector, and that's exactly what we try to do. So yes, we don't seek to develop innovations apart from the information and education ourselves. We believe that by bringing together small groups or consortia, where there may be a combination of researchers, schools, or universities as potential users of a tool, and other actors, which might be, say, public health and so on. And then by bringing these people together, we use innovation management methods such as road mapping to create a vision of what might be achieved using this particular innovation, to understand realistically where we are now, and then to identify a series of stepping stones to get from the current state to the chosen future. And as part of that process, not only identifying the stepping stones, but also the barriers and the enablers, which will enable it to be successful. And once we've got that, we can then craft proposals for grant applications to enable development of the innovation, or piloting of that innovation in a setting building on the consortium that we've built. So, I love the term super connector, and very much a facilitator, but facilitating using innovation management methods which have been researched and developed by organizations like the Institute for Manufacturing, which has got 20, 25 years experience, not just of the research, but also application of these methods in industry around the world.
Absolutely, yeah. Applying those principles that you yourself have been able to master in various other roles throughout your career, which is great use of that skills and knowledge. I think another term that could be accurate and cool to describe your foundation is, as well as being a super connector, also a catalyst, really, to
Yeah.
move innovation in the right direction, not just in any direction, but in the right directions. And that is a hugely noble cause, I think, because to companies and startups, it may not seem like that would be an extremely profitable place to be, right? But it's extremely essential in order to collectively move everyone towards the right direction. So, how do you, with the foundation, keep it financially sustainable and thriving? Because surely to be thriving financially would enable you to have an even greater impact in all the work that you do.
Indeed. And from a financial perspective, I suppose we have currently three major strands of income. The first is public donation, which has been absolutely fundamental, particularly in the early days, but it remains a very important aspect of our financial sustainability. The second strand is we work with a small number of grant-giving foundations who have supported us over a number of years and have been very generous in in their support for our vision and supporting us with significant grants. And then thirdly, in terms of project grants, so we with our collaborators, we'll submit grant applications either directly ourselves to support the work that we do and that our collaborators do, or we may be part of project bids with a university or other institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. I think relying on your work to speak for itself and producing these reports that really do push forward our understanding, that gets YPMH out there and raises awareness of all the wonderful work you're doing. And that is kind of what keeps it sustaining, right? Because when people see the impact of your work, then it makes them want to donate and get involved. So um, it's great that you're able to have your work and the impact of that keep you going financially as well, which is exactly um, how I guess a charitable foundation is going to succeed.
Indeed.
And just to move the conversation to a specific area that may well be contributing to the mental health challenges of young people, I think one of the most fascinating areas and one of the last to be facilitated by innovation is the social factor. And in our digitally connected world, human to human connections are becoming all the more valuable, especially for young people who we know are even more digitally connected than anyone else. And these real human interactions have a hugely important role to play in improving and protecting our mental health. And I wonder, from your work, have you come across any examples of social connection being facilitated to improve the mental health of young people?
That's it's a really important and interesting question. There are so many dimensions in terms of the impact of digital technologies on young people's health and mental health in particular. Some is positive, some is less positive. So in terms of the less positive, obviously, we hear every day on the news about content, whether it's about self-harm, suicide, and forms of abuse, and also the adverse social contact, so bullying and those sorts of online activities. But nonetheless, there are, and the research I think does support this, some positive aspects of digital communication, so enabling communication between people, between groups, and but it's, I think, still quite a challenging area. And what I wonder is whether there is a way to use a combination of online and in person, so a kind of hybrid model whereby people build relationships that are perhaps begin online, but nonetheless involve real face-to-face communication as well, and then is sustained by digital interaction until the next time that the group or individuals come together. in much the way that the work environment seems to have evolved over the last 5 years or so. I mean, previously everything was pretty much face to face or via the telephone. With COVID, everything was online, and many organisations have moved to a hybrid model. What I wonder is whether the best way forward is to develop a combination of online and in-person interactions for young people. I wouldn't say I've got a really strong idea for a specific innovation at this point, although one of our volunteers is working on something similar. But I would say we're not there yet. But I think that is probably where my gut feel says we should be looking.
Yeah, it's interesting because although in-person interactions may well be healthier for young people to engage in, we need to meet them where they already are, which it may well
Exactly.
be
Yeah.
online. And so being able to create a system that connects the two would be perhaps a strong solution there. Also, in your recent report on depression that we've been discussing, I especially enjoyed learning about the COM-B model that you outlined, which for our listeners stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, and behavior change, making COM-B essentially, a model that proposes that to enable effective behavior change, people need the motivation, capability, and opportunity to do so. And the report states that this can be a useful model for loved ones to help someone struggling with their mental health, really doing everything they can to improve their motivation, their capability, and giving them the opportunity to achieve that behavior change. So, Peter, what role do you think loved ones have to play in supporting someone through their mental health challenges, and how can they be more empowered to do so?
Um, that's such an important question, and I think back to when our son Will was going through his challenges, and our biggest enemy was ignorance, and uh, I think if we, as parents and as society, can understand in a holistic way the risk factors that lead to mental health conditions like depression, and support young people in a way that where the parent identifies it in an appropriate way the most likely risk factors for their child, whether it's, let's say, food and nutrition, exercise, sleep, perhaps substance use, chronic stress, and then can support the child through the difficulties they're facing. Now, my own experience with Will was that as sort of 16-year-old, 17-year-old, he had a very narrow diet, essentially eating highly processed food. It was either pizza, or pizza. And that, I think, contributed in many ways. And if I had had the knowledge about why consuming a diet of or minimally processed food was so important, I might have been able to craft a more persuasive argument to support Will in his choice of foods. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I mean, the highly processed foods are quite addictive. They have great mouthfeel and are enjoyable to eat. And so helping parents by giving information, but also I think what we could potentially do is work with innovative food companies to help them to develop a range of mentally healthful foods. And it's not rocket science. Once we understand what mentally healthful food looks like, and I think we do have a much better understanding now than we did even 2 or 3 years ago. So there are things that we can do, but at the heart of it, I think, is information and education about the risk factors, helping parents to work out what are the risk factors for their individual child, and then begin to put in place where opportunities to, for example, access mentally healthful food in their local context, and also perhaps helping them to develop the capability to plan, buy, or otherwise access, prepare, and consume as a family the mentally healthful foods that are so necessary.
Hmm. Absolutely, and that's why so much of your work in improving our understanding will have that kind of impact even at the family level for
Mm.
helping loved ones take care of their loved one, and yeah, really tackling that ignorance that we have because we're not really taught this as well as we should be in school or in society. So yeah, I'd love for all of those insights that you and your team generate to be so widely accessible for people, and perhaps there's some innovation that needs to be done in making that content really um, meet people where they are, totally engaging, embedding it within media somehow, because as you said, arming people with that information is really where it all starts. Without that,
Absolutely.
we really are blind to what we can do, and fairly helpless. So yeah, it's fantastic that that's really one of the core impacts of your work, and it's directly addressing that problem.
Thank you. I mean, another aspect, though, is if we take, for example, food or indeed exercise, um, what goes on in the family is really important. However, children spend perhaps a smaller part of their waking hours at home than they do outside the home. And whether it's school, after school clubs, um, with friends, and so on. But if we can also get this understanding really embedded within schools, colleges, universities, um, employers, prisons, youth clubs, etc., then and encourage those organizations to make the requisite amount of exercise and physical activity time available, and also the food. It's so important. Um, so it's not just about the family and the direct friends. It's really about the whole set of groups that a young person that influence a young person's mental health. And so by that I mean the organizations they might engage with, so schools, etc., the health and social care system, so public health, primary care, the GPs, secondary care, clinical psychologists need to understand this. And then, so media and social media needs to be informed and picking up this knowledge that is robust and can really have an impact and bring it to people's attention.
Hmm. Yeah, again, that's totally aligned with your ecosystem level approach there, really trying to um, the all the angles that young people are faced with, trying to make sure that they are all armed with the right information to create the conditions for young people to have healthy minds. So yeah, love that take. Just to bring things to a close, then I know you've done so much work in improving our understanding of the mind and continue to do so. Um, and another key area where that understanding is furthered is needing to improve the way we measure the outcomes of addressing mental health problems. Because if we don't have those clear goals, then we don't really know what we're optimizing for. So, what are your thoughts on mental health outcomes and how we can do a better job of defining those, measuring those, and working towards those outcomes?
Um, Clinical psychologists for a number of years have used tools like DSM-5, GAD-7, PHQ-9, etc., as ways to assess a young person's mental distress. And something like DSM-5 can take 90 minutes for a trained clinical psychologist to use. So obviously that's very limiting in terms of the number of people we can measure. The tools that I mentioned that are coming out of Department of Psychiatry at Cambridge have, I think, a really terrific opportunity to identify mental distress. And these contain all of the questions that exist within DSM-5, PHQ-9, and so on, but use a sort of reasoning method which reduces the number of questions that need to be asked. And so a young person can complete the question set for within 5 to 8 questions and get a robust understanding, perhaps for the school that they're within, on the state of mental distress. And so I think what we could potentially do is use a tool like that to regularly snapshot the state of mental distress or well-being in an environment such as a school. And we can, what I understand is that the team is looking to develop the methodology further. So it's not just about identifying mental distress, but potentially to actually identify the condition that the individual has or may have. And so I think that offers a very efficient and potentially powerful way to get a better handle on the metrics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like there's just as much innovation that needs to be done in building the products as there is in how we create these metrics and the systems in place that these products can be embedded within. So yeah, it's there's a lot of work to be done in every angle on every front, and I'm sure you
It,
yeah.
Indeed, if I can just add to that, I mean,
Mhm.
um, I think having applied, or if one applies this particular tool in a school environment, it's not sufficient just to say, oh, you know, these X children are in mental distress. There needs to be a clear set of roles and resources and processes to ensure that they are helped appropriately, and that could be um, clarity about, well, who is actually responsible for the testing with assigned resources and support for that person or group of people, the link to the parents when mental distress is identified, and links to appropriate support for the young person, either within the school or outside the school if it's beyond the scope of that individual school's capability. And so these things need to be thought about in the implementation of these tools so that people aren't left isolated. Oh, you know, Johnny sort of is in mental distress and it sounds quite severe, but we don't know what to do about it. You know, that's just not going to be acceptable.
Mhm. Yeah, and schools, as you mentioned, have such a big role to play. Kids can spend more of their waking hours in school than they do at home, as you mentioned.
Mm.
So there's a huge amount of work to be done in making sure our evolving understanding of mental health problems makes its way into the schools and the teachers' minds, so they know what to look out for and they know how to respond when these things come up.
Indeed, and there are some really encouraging methods which are coming out of, again, the Institute for Manufacturing on designing ecosystems where we can look at and design the role of different actors so that these kinds of things are thought through in a robust way. And I think that's definitely the way to go. But it's quite a challenge to bring together schools, public health, primary care, and so on, such that we get all of the actors working together to design an appropriate ecosystem that really functions as it should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine it being quite a painstaking process where you need to get a lot of buy-in, but it's
Indeed.
definitely the kind of work that needs a lot more attention. So, Peter, it has been a pleasure to learn about this mission that you and your team are on to improve young people's mental health by building understanding and inspiring innovation. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
For everyone listening, how can people support and follow your work?
So our work is on the YPMH website, which is ypmh.org. We will be over the coming months doing more external communication, so there will be more information coming out on platforms. But certainly at the moment, people can download publications such as Depression is Really Not All in the Mind from our website. If you go to the publications menu, that I think is top of the list. There are also a couple of more substantial publications that give the underpinning science and description of the innovations and so on. So people are very welcome to download all of those free of charge.
Absolutely, and they will be linked in the description for everyone to access very easily. One thing in the description from me as well is a link that you'll find to the MindTech matrix. So every organization that has featured on MindTech is, of course, solving a mental health problem with a technology-enabled solution. And much like the focus that YPMH takes to really understanding unmet needs and the areas for innovation, I've created a visual map of the mental health problems each featured organization is addressing, and that will be on one axis. On the other axis are the solutions that they're building. So if you click on the link in the description, you can be emailed access to this MindTech matrix, and it may well be very aligned with the work that YPMH do as well. Of course, you will also be updated whenever there's a new episode and get early access to testing out some of the products discussed on the podcast. Everything you need is in the description. Thank you very much. Until next time, goodbye.